Our climate crisis moment today highlights the environmental toll of war on people and on our planet. Today, we honor the earth and we recognize... Okay.
And if you can put your feet down.
Oh, sorry.
Because you're blocking the camera.
Well, thanks for the coaching, Gail. Today, we honor the earth and we recognize that the natural world is a silent victim of war. We are shocked and horrified for the human cost of war and for the devastation that war brings to all living things. Soldiers dig trenches, tanks flatten vegetation, bombs scar landscapes, and explosives ignite fire. What's more, in many conflicts, armed forces often exploit lootable resources, such as oil and timber, to fund war efforts. War causes deep damage to land and sky, to plants and animals. Ukraine is home to vibrant wetlands and forests and untouched grasslands. Russian troops have already entered or conducted military operations in more than a third of Ukraine's protected natural areas. Military activity near one reserve sparked fires large enough to be seen from space. In Vietnam, the United States actively destroyed ecosystems, spraying defoliants over wide swaths of jungle to thin out forests and deprive enemy forces of cover. In Africa, scientists have found that armed conflict is correlated with declines in wildlife across protected areas. Wildlife populations tended to be stable in peacetime, but decline during war. I'll say that last piece again, that wildlife numbers tended to be stable in peacetime. When people are doing well, we have the greatest opportunity to secure a future of environmental health for all. In this climate moment, we honor all the wounded and fallen, and we call for an end to war. May we be the peace we seek.
Thank you. Reading a poem called Wounded in Action. Happens to be a poem that I wrote. Wounded in action. His mint condition 85 Chevy pickup truck moved deliberately with the slow traffic this Friday afternoon. Burgundy with beige side panels, chrome wheels and front bumper. Decals on the cab's back window, the American flag, a bumper sticker, Vietnam vet and proud of it. The back license plate with the Purple Heart insignia inscribed, Wounded in Action. I drive up beside his truck, wanting to glimpse his face, as though sighting him would provide me some experience, a way of touching his past as it now lives, like touching the name of a high school buddy, cut into the black granite wall in Washington, D.C., where all of the faces of all the visitors are reflected by those who died in action. Once, I was in a room with 1,000 other men, standing with red bandanas tied on the site of every scar on our bodies. Silent, eyes wandering, felt my eyes fill and spill over, heard sobs from different parts of the room, and the room holding us there, a passive witness, a mirror reflecting whatever would stand and face it. Like him, I live in my scars and outside of them too, and I know now wounded is a word that defines the present as well as the past. and understand how a man could get stuck there in both places, stop feeling the constant nudge of his soul until the day he forgets who he is and walks out into an unfamiliar wilderness, out past the motionless stall of rush hour traffic, just far enough to remember the first time he was lost and scared, and the sound of the first voice entered his ear, when his whole body lived in a safe, warm rocking, and he remembered his dream again.
In March, I went to Italy to teach for 10 days. Instructed to give a brief introduction about where I was from, I decided to give a brief land acknowledgement to each group. I told Italian high school and middle school students about indigenous people in general, and the Amamutsan of our area in particular. These students were eager to hear about the people who lived on this continent for thousands of years before 1492. And they were interested to hear about how indigenous people live their lives today. And before I left on my trip, I was surprised to find out that I would be very close to two of several cemeteries in Italy where indigenous people are buried. During the Second World War, thousands of Native Americans voluntarily joined the armed forces of Canada and the US to defend rights that they lacked in their own communities. Fighting side by side with Allied troops in the liberation of Italy, and sometimes side by side with Jewish troops, some of these indigenous people did not make it back. I didn't have time to visit either cemetery, but I will mention some names and tribes from graves I might have seen. Wilfred Contin, 21 years old, Ojibwe. Thomas Beat, 26, Cree. Herbert Prince, 28, Nakazdili. And apart from these men and their native brothers, I want to acknowledge a very grim milestone. On March 23, 2003, 23-year-old Army Specialist Lori Piestawa, Hopi, was the first Native American woman in history to die in combat while serving the US military when she was ambushed in Iraq. In song, we will now lift them up in our memory as we gratefully live our lives on the unceded territory of the Azwaz-speaking Upi tribe. And we thank the Amamutsan tribal band for their work in restoration, restoring traditional stewardship practices on these lands, and restoring themselves as they heal from historical trauma.
We're going to sing Golden. If you'd like to join us, it's 10:57. We want to send a special blessing to the base. I think we should do it 3 times. We'll do it 3 times. Go ahead.
This is a poem for Memorial Day written by independent radio producer Joe Frank and first read on NPR on Memorial Day 2005. It's called An Ode to War and Peace. So here's to the snappy salute, to spit and polish, the clicking of booted heels. Here's to the officers' club and the swaggering commandant, to the loving but abusive drill sergeant, the constant flow of insult that is the philosopher's stone of survival. Here's to the young lieutenant, fresh from the academy, to the troop ship, soldiers with their duffel bags slung over their shoulders, their cloth caps slouched and angled on their brows. And here's to weeping parents, sweethearts and children, clutching at the skirts of their mothers, to final tearful embraces and brass bands playing. Here's to the night before battle, to the assault, to the airborne troopers plunging from their droning seed pods, to the rubber dinghies landing at night. Here's to where the farm boy and the city dweller meet and are made equal. Here's to the clanking treads of armored personnel carriers, to bullets and howitzers, carbines and recoilless rifles, to mortars and anti-personnel bombs, to fragmentation grenades and tear gas canisters, to machine gun emplacements and flamethrowers, to the serrated bayonet and the deadly rain of shrapnel. Here's to the ragtag remnants of a courageous platoon. Here's to raising the flag on a shattered field of victory. To the prisoner of war camp, to the medevac chopper, the hospital ship, to chaplains, to burial detail and body bags, to taps and other songs. Here's to words like courage, sacrifice, discipline, glory. Here's to war. I raise my glass to you and gaze into the roiling liquid of death's own intoxication. Oh, war, you have made the low elevated. You have created heroes, and history will be written by your winner. Peace is pallid next to you. Peace can skulk and shrink, a weakling, a coward's paradise. Peace, you lukewarm bowl of grandmother's mush, you washed out stand-in for manly behavior. Peace walks through the marketplace offering second-hand bargains. Peace, the shaver of points, the cut-rate merchant. Peace, the destroyer of valor, the apologist, the compromiser, the appeaser, the rust upon the edge of courage's great sword. What is peace but an excuse, a reason for cowardice, a refusal to accept one's responsibility? I spit on peace. There are no medals to peace, no honors, no marching bands, no great monuments to peace, no martial melodies. There are no gigantic fireworks displays, no champagne corks popped to peace, no last cigarette smoked in its honor. The very absurdity of a nation declaring peace on another shocks the imagination. And who among us can say that he has heard of the spoils of peace? Is there such a thing as a peace hero? Who among us have gathered with his old cronies late at night, hoisted a glass, and told peace stories? What valiant young man has been welcomed back from peace? What young boy has gazed longingly at his father, saying that he would willingly go to peace to save his country?
Yeah, this song I'm going to sing is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is the Universal Soldier. It's written by Buffy St. Marie. How many of you have ever heard of Buffy St. Marie? So I don't have to tell you a whole lot. I think she was a...
Preaching of the choir.
Right. She was a a Canadian indigenous member of the Cree Nation. And she was a songwriter and activist and pacifist. But she said that the reason why she was inspired to write this song was that she was at airport in San Francisco waiting for a flight to go to Toronto. And as she was sitting there, she saw some military medics pulling out this gurney with a young man lying in it. And she asked the medics, what's wrong? They said he was in the war. And that was at the time, she says, when we didn't even know we were in war. She said, but then I just thought, who can we blame for this tragedy? Shall we blame the military, the career military men who waged the war, spending time making war better? Or should we, who sends and makes the call to send these guys out there? It's the lawmen, the politicians. They are the ones that we should blame. But wait a minute. Who elects these politicians? It's you and me. He's 5'2" and he's 6'4". He fights with missiles and with spears. He's all of 31 and he's only 17. He's been a soldier for 1,000 years. He's a Catholic, a Hindu, an atheist, a Jain, a Buddhist and a Baptist and a Jew. And he knows he shouldn't kill, and he knows he always will. Killing for you, my friend, and me for you. And he's fighting for Canada, he's fighting for France, he's fighting for the USA. And he's fighting for the Russians, and he's fighting for Ukraine. And he thinks we'll put an end to war this way. And he's fighting for democracy, he's fighting for the Reds. He's fighting for, he thinks we'll put an end to war. And he's fighting for the Russians, and he's fighting for Ukraine. And he thinks we'll put an end to war this way. But how could Hitler have condemned him? No.
But without him, how could
Hitler have condemned him and God? Without him, Caesar would have stood alone. He's the one who gives his body as a weapon of the war. And without him, all this killing can't go on. He's a universal soldier, and he really is to blame. His orders come from far away no more. They come from here and there, and you and me, and brothers, can't you see? This is not the way we put an end to war.
Thanks. The question of whether our species is predisposed to war is a hot topic in academic circles. This reading is based on an article from Scientific American called "War is Not a Part of Human Nature" by anthropologist R. Brian Ferguson. His latest book, Chimpanzees, War and History, will be released later this year. Let's think about it. Do people, or more likely just males, have a natural tendency to take up arms, moving humanity toward collective violence? The word collective
is key. War is social. Groups are organized to kill people from other groups. Today, a dispute over the roots of warfare revolves around two opposing views among social scientists. Fortunately, the weapons used are scientific research in words. From one perspective, our species has an innate impulse to get rid of competitors. In this scenario, humans, all the way back to our common ancestors with chimpanzees, have always made war. The other position holds that armed conflict emerged relatively recently as social conditions changed. These two opposing sides are conveniently called hawks and doves. So, if war is an inborn tendency, we should find evidence of it throughout prehistory, even in small societies. Hawks declare that we have indeed found such evidence. They claim that when there is a fairly complete picture of any society on Earth, there is almost always evidence of warfare. In this view, war has served as a means of natural selection, survival of the fittest. This perspective has achieved broad influence, spreading to numerous fields. If true, the roots of recent war and genocide go back for 10 or even hundreds of thousands of years among our hunter-gatherer ancestors, all the way back to our shared ancestors with chimpanzees. Some suggest that this theory explains why the tendency to protect our own tribe naturally leads to xenophobia. Can you imagine having this perspective on humanity? How could you sleep at night? And if wars are natural eruptions of instinctive hate, why even bother looking for peaceful alternatives? Fortunately, doves like Ferguson, with the help of archaeology, challenge this view. So when did war begin? In the search for its origins, archaeologists look for different kinds of evidence. Artwork on cave walls is one. Paintings from 25,000 years ago show what look to be spears penetrating people. But some of the unfinished figures in these cave drawings have tails. And what if the wavy lines crossing them represent shamanic powers, not spears? Weapons are also evidence of war, but these artifacts may not always be what they seem. Some weapons found are not robust enough to have inflicted lethal force and may have been carried to symbolize authority. And in well-functioning societies, authority is used to resolve conflict, not initiate it. Beyond art and weapons, experts look to settlement remains for clues. People who fear attack usually take precautions. In some flatlands, scattered homes morphed into centralized, defendable villages, for example. Other villages were surrounded by mounded enclosures. But not all these mounds work for defense. Some may simply indicate a different social group. Human skeletal remains could be another way of resolving when war began, but even these can be misleading. Wounds from projectiles only occasionally leave marks on bone, so shaped points found with human remains could be ceremonial rather than proof of a violent death. Archaeological evidence is often difficult to interpret. Have humans been waging war for the entire history of our species? When concentrating on worst-case scenarios, the situation looks bleak, and that can lead to dire conclusions, like what the hawks assert. But also, misconceptions are common, and they can be made even worse by accounts in the media. As with modern news, sensationalism sells. Likewise, Any discovery of ancient killings grabs headlines. More often than not, though, excavations show no sign of violence, but they don't get the press. When looking for even a hint of war, a comprehensive analysis of reports from a variety of eras and places paints an entirely different picture. War is hardly ubiquitous and does not go back endlessly in the archaeological record. Human warfare did indeed have a beginning. Many archaeologists suggest that war emerged in some areas around 10,000 BC with the advent of more complex societies. But there really is no simple answer. War appeared at different times in different places. Examining the question of the human tendency to wage war led Ferguson to examine our chimpanzee relatives. Ferguson found that conflict among chimps is sometimes collective and deadly, but it lacks other dimensions found in human warfare. Our conflicts involve groups unified by political organization, and the ultimate us versus them that exists in wartime is a cultural phenomenon. These social constructs have no analogies in chimps. Despite this, some scientists still argue that chimpanzees possess the inclination to kill outsiders, inherited from the last common ancestor of chimps and people, an impulse that remains to push humans into deadly conflict with those outside their community. Ferguson's work disputes that claim. He found that the most extreme cases of chimp violence were tied to human disturbance. Making that case required Ferguson to go through every single reported chimpanzee killing, an equivalent of 426 years of field observations. His conclusion? Chimps, as a species, are not by nature killer apes, and neither are we. What a relief, as it can give us license to pursue our higher calling as peacemakers. I closed with a quote by someone who, in the 89 years she's lived, knows both chimpanzees and humans as well. The incomparable Jane Goodall gives us a way forward with Ferguson's conclusions. She says, "It is the undeniable qualities of human love and compassion and self-sacrifice that give me hope for the future. We are indeed often cruel and evil. Nobody can deny this. We gang up on one another. We torture each other with words and deeds. We fight. We kill. But we are also capable of the most noble, generous, and heroic behavior." Thank you.
And now for a brief history of the Department of Peace. The Department of Peace, under the executive branch of the government of the United States, has been proposed many times over the course of many years. The earliest proposal dates back to 1793, when founding father Benjamin Rush, signer on the Declaration of Independence, wrote an essay entitled "A Plan of a Peace Office for the United States." Rush called for a cabinet-level position on equal footing with what was then called the Department of War. The idea was to preserve a perpetual peace in the United States. After no success creating a peace department in the early years of the country, the idea was never addressed during the entirety of the 19th century, not even before, during, or after the Civil War. Then in 1925, Carrie Chapman Catt, founder of the League of Women Voters, during the Cause and Cure of War conference, publicly suggested a cabinet-level Department of Peace and Secretary of Peace be established. Other peace activists supported this idea during the late 1920s. Then in 1935, Senator Matthew Neely, a Democrat from West Virginia, wrote and introduced the first bill calling for the creation of a United States Department of Peace. It was reintroduced in 1937 and again in 1938. In 1943, at the height of World War II, Senator Alexander Wiley, a Republican from Wisconsin, speaking on the Senate floor, called for the United States to become the first government in the world to have a Secretary of Peace. Bills were submitted to Congress in 1945, 46, and 47. Between 1955 and 1968, 85 Senate and House bills were introduced calling for a Department of Peace. In 1969, a Democratic senator and a Republican House representative introduced bills to create a Department of Peace, and the Senate bill was reintroduced in 1979. House bills were introduced every year between 2001 and 2011, and another Senate bill was introduced in 2005. Representative Barbara Lee, Congresswoman from California's 12th Congressional District, that includes Oakland, California, has introduced bills every year since 2013. As of now, there is no United States Department of Peace, no Secretary of Peace.